Hello viewers, welcome to K Diagnostics, Dio here. Today we have a 2006 Bluebird school bus with a C7 CAT engine. The complaint on this bus is that the gauges on the dashboard are sweeping back and forth while the bus is being driven. So the driver cannot tell how fast the bus is going. He can't tell the engine RPMs. So he brought it here so we can fix it. I have to point out that when you first start this bus, there is an initial sweep that the gauges on the dash make. After that initial sweep, then the gauges will tell you the engine RPM, and if you're driving, it will also tell you the vehicle speed. But right now, the driver cannot tell that because the gauges are just going back and forth. So we're gonna go inside the bus and confirm the driver's complaint. After confirming the complaint, we're going to connect the scan tool to the bus to see what kind of trouble codes we have in memory. After retrieving the trouble code, we will know what directions we can go to fix this. So let's go inside the bus and confirm the driver's complaint. So here is the dash. I'm going to turn the key on. So key on. Actually, there's an initial sweep of all the gauges when you first turn the key on. But as you guys can see, with the key on, they're all sweeping. This is already abnormal. The gauges should only sweep once and then go back to zero until you start it. So now I'm gonna start the bus. So the bus is running right now. And unfortunately, I can't really get the whole dashboard on camera, but I'm just focusing on these two gauges right here. So the speedometer and the tachometer. Can you guys see how the gauges are just going all over the place? The gauges are going crazy right now. So customer complaint confirmed. So now if we see here on the display, if you guys can read, I hope the camera is picking that up, it says engine CAN failure. Engine CAN failure. Let me see if I can zoom into that. So, come on, focus. Well, it's not focusing very well over there, but I hope you guys can see that. It says engine CAN failure, and the gauges are just all over the place. They're just sweeping back and forth. So I'm gonna turn the bus off. So bus is off. Customer complaint confirmed. And I think we got some directions there. We're gonna connect the scanner to the bus and then see what we can find. Here are the codes. One thing that I'm interested in is this code right here, the one that says J1939 device now responding. So the J1939 network is not responding, so it's down. Something is wrong with our communication system with the CAN bus, with the network. We're gonna focus on this trouble code that says J1939 not responding. The J1939 system is the CAN bus system. CAN bus stands for Controller Area Network. This is the network that the control units inside the bus use to talk to each other. So the network is down. We have to figure out what is causing this network to not respond. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit more about this network and how it works. Before we do that, I'm going to print out a wiring diagram for this CAN bus system, so we can see how many modules we have on this network, and then we're gonna talk a little bit about how it works. This should be a very easy diagnosis because this bus doesn't have a lot of modules. I believe it has around 4 or 5 modules. And most of the modules, pretty much all of them, they all live here in the engine bay. And the network on this one is really short. It just goes from pretty much the right side of the engine up to the cluster. So this should be pretty easy. Hopefully it's going to be easy. I'm going to print out the wiring diagram, and then we will talk about this network together, and then we'll see what we can do to fix this. I will print out the wiring diagram and bring you guys back up. Alright, here is the computer data lines circuit. On this network we have 4 control modules. And the control modules are the ABS control module, this guy over here. And as you can see, we have 2 wires on the network. I hope you can see. So right here it says J1939 positive, the yellow wire, which means CAN high, and then J1939 negative, CAN low. Okay, so this here is the first control module, the ABS control module, and then the second one is the transmission control module, and the third control module here is the engine control module, and then the fourth one is the instrument cluster. So this here is the network system, and this is what these control modules use to talk to each other. And if you look up here, we have 2 resistors up here. These are called terminating resistors. These resistors are installed on each end of the network, and we will talk about these resistors just in a little bit. Now, the question you might have is, why do we have this network on the car or on the bus? Well, these control modules have to talk to each other, because if they don't talk to each other, basically it's going to be a mess. And one example I can give you is on your car. If you look at your shift stick, the little stick that you move to put your car in drive or reverse, right next to that stick it usually says park, reverse, neutral, and drive. And when you look on your cluster, on your dash, you also have the park symbol, the drive, neutral, and so on. Well, the information, the gear information, comes from the transmission control unit, because the transmission control module is in charge of the transmission. The transmission control module takes that information and sends it to the instrument cluster. That's why you are able to see the gear you're in on your car. That's why you were able to see it on the dash. Okay, so that's just one example. Hopefully I can get this thing to stay here. That's just one example, and the way they do that is these control units send a small voltage on the network, and that voltage goes back and forth. That's how the control units know about the information, or that's how they know about what's going on in these different areas of the vehicle. And these wires are twisted together. We're going to talk about these terminating resistors now. I drew another wiring diagram here. I'm going to show it to you right here in a minute. These here you see, these little blue things you see, these are interfaces, they call them. Okay, these interfaces are basically, they're just like little bridges that connect these wires together. And on our school bus we do have one bridge, so the resistor is installed in one of the bridges. They call them interface. Okay, so this J1939 interface, I hope you can read that. J1939 interface. So the good thing here is that these resistors, because we're going to test them eventually when we go back inside the bus, these resistors are installed on these interfaces. Now, since we have a trouble code that's saying J1939 not responding, that can be caused by a couple of things. We can have a control module that's defective. If we have a bad control module, it's gonna pull the whole network down, and that can cause the network to not respond. if we have an open wire, if one of these wires on the network is open, that will also pull the network down, and the network is not going to respond. We can have a short to ground on one of these wires. We can have these two wires short together, or we could also have a short to power on one of these wires. So it could be a couple of things. Or we could also have an open resistor, and that will also cause the network to not respond, or both resistors can go out. On most vehicles, on modern cars, these resistors are incorporated in one of these modules. So you have two modules on a car, or on the newer buses, two modules will have these resistors. But this one, this school bus is a 2006, so these resistors are just on a harness. If we end up having a bad resistor, we can just find it and replace it. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you the wiring schematic that I just drew, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about this network before we start doing the test. Alright, here's my homemade CAN bus system wiring diagram that I drew. As you can tell, I didn't go to art school, I went to trade school. So now here are the control units that we have on the bus. We have 4 control units: the ABS control unit, the transmission control unit, the engine control unit, and the instrument cluster. This is the network. I wanted to do this because I wanted to show you that these wires are twisted. Although on the other wiring diagram we looked at, these wires were not twisted. I want you guys to know that these wires are twisted as a pair, and this is how you're gonna see them on the vehicle. And on each end of the network we have 2 resistors, which are 120 ohms. So 120 ohms for each resistor. Now, the question you might have is, why do we have this network? Like I just said earlier, we have these networks so that these control units can talk to each other. If the transmission control module wants to know the wheel speed, it's going to get that information from the ABS control module. And if the ABS control module wants to know the gear that the vehicle is in, it's going to get that information from the transmission control module. So they talk back and forth, and they send a small voltage in the network to talk to each other. Now, let's talk about these resistors now. You might say, well, why do we have these resistors? These resistors are called terminating resistors. We have these 2 120 ohm terminating resistors because the CAN bus is a high-speed data bus, and as a signal travels down the data lines, if it's not terminated, part of that signal will reflect back and interfere with the next data signal coming down the line. So basically, we don't want any interference in the network, because as a signal is sent through the network, if we don't have a resistor to basically absorb that information, there will be interference, because the signal is going to go through the network, and if there's no resistor, it's going to come back, which will cause interference, and we don't want interference on the network. Okay, because if there's interference in the network, that can disrupt communication and cause the system to fail. All right, so this is why we have these 2 resistors on each end of the network, and these resistors are installed in parallel. We do have 2 resistors in parallel here, and when you have 2 resistors in parallel, so if you want to know the resistance of the system, you have to divide the value or the resistance of one resistor by the number of resistors that you have on the network or on the circuit. So since we have 2 120 ohm resistors, we're going to divide 120 by 2. So our system should have a resistance of 60 ohms. Okay, like I said, a network that's not responding can be caused by an open wire in the network, a defective control module that's pulling the whole network down, a open resistor, a shorted network wire, whether it's CAN high or CAN low, if a wire is shorted to either ground or power, or these two can be shorted together also. Okay, and again, just to recap what I said, CAN bus means controller area network. Okay, that's the network that these control units use to talk to each other. So now that we have talked about the network, now that we know a little bit how it works and why we have this network on any vehicle, and then there's a lot more that goes into it. There's a lot more. I didn't cover everything. I didn't go in depth. I just wanted to keep it simple and sweet. So now we're gonna go to the bus and do some measurements. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to do a resistance check on the network. So the resistance check I'm gonna do, let me bring this wiring diagram back here. The resistance check I want to do, I want to go to the data link connector, because right here is the data link connector. I don't know if you can read, but on the data link connector we have pin C and pin D. Hopefully you can see pin C and pin D. Actually, before we go inside the bus, I will show you a picture of the data link connector. So we're gonna connect our multimeter across pin C and pin D, and we're gonna do a resistance check of the network. Since we have two terminating resistors on each end of the network, and they are 120 ohms, on a good working network we should have 60 ohms. So we're gonna check for 60 ohms on this network first. If we do have 60 ohms, we're gonna connect a lab scope across these two wires, across CAN high and CAN low. We're gonna turn the key on to see the communication waveform, and then we'll see if it looks good. If it does, that's fine. If it doesn't, we'll see what else. But CAN high usually produces a signal between 4 volts and 5 volts. So it goes from 0 to 5 volts, or sometimes 4 volts. And then CAN low goes from 1.5 to 4 volts, sometimes 2 volts. It depends. I don't have a specific waveform or a non-good waveform that I can compare with whatever we're gonna see very soon. So we will just see how the pattern looks, and then we'll just make a judgment, or we'll just make a call based on what we see. But we're gonna do a home test first. We're gonna take a resistance measurement, and then we will do a lab scope test. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you the data link connector. I have a picture of the data link connector I'm gonna show you, and then we'll go inside the bus and do these checks. All right, here is our data link connector. It is a 9-pin data link connector. So we're gonna focus on pin D and pin C. As you can see, D and C are our pins for the CAN bus system, so the J1939 network. So we're gonna go inside the bus, and this data link connector is under the steering wheel. So we're gonna connect to D and C. We're gonna use our multimeter first to take a resistance measurement of the network. So now let's go inside the bus and take some measurements here at the data link connector. All right, so we are back inside the bus. Our data link connector is somewhere down over here. So there is the data link connector. I'm gonna turn on my multimeter first. We're gonna put it on the ohm scale. So right here. And you have to do this test with the key off, or you also have to disconnect the battery, okay? Because you don't want to damage your multimeter. Ideally, disconnecting the battery is even better. So now we have to come under here and find pin D and C, I believe. Was it D and C? So here is our data link connector. Now let me find D and C. I think D and C is these two right here. So this is, I don't know if you can tell, but there are letters. You see the letters right there? So there's D and C. So we're gonna connect to D. Here is D. Right? And then C. This guy. And I'm using these awesome test leads from AES Wave. Awesome test leads. If you don't have them, they're very good to have. So now let's connect our multimeter through these test leads. Alright, so one test lead is gonna go to this guy. And then the other test lead is gonna go to this. I'm doing this one-handed, guys, so bear with me. Now, as you can see right here, bingo, we are reading 116, I'm sorry, 116 or 117 ohms. So this is a problem. A good network should have a reading of 60 ohms instead of 117. So basically, one of the resistors is open. Now, we can use a lab scope and start it to look at the pattern, to look at the voltage waveform of the network, you know, just for the heck of it. But this is already taking us on the right direction. So something is wrong with one of the resistors. It's either the resistor or maybe the network or one of the wires is open. So now, the network, like I said, is a pretty short network. It goes from the cluster down here to the engine bay. And the resistors, the interface that contains the resistors, there's one here behind the engine cover, and then there's another one behind the instrument cluster. Alright, so I got the lab scope on. So now we're gonna connect the lab scope test leads to these two test leads here that we connected to the data link connector. So I'm gonna disconnect the multimeter. Let's get the multimeter out of the way. So one of the scope test leads is gonna go to one of these, and then the green trace or the green test lead is gonna go right here. Okay, so now let's go to scope multimeter. Alright, so now I'm gonna turn on the key. So let's turn the key on. And what do we see here on the screen? So how does this look? So this is a voltage communication waveform. So the yellow trace is scan high and the green trace is scan low. So I can't really tell. This kind of looks like, I mean, we know that the resistance on the network is high. Okay, so there's definitely a problem there. So this is a bad communication voltage waveform because I don't really know how the good one looks like. Okay, so let me decrease the time base here. Let's see what we're gonna see. I mean, they're definitely mirroring each other because what we want is both lines mirroring each other. They are mirroring each other. So you see how the voltage on this side is going from low to high, and this one is going from technically high to low. Okay, so let's see some D0 numbers here. I can't really tell. I don't have a known good pattern. This doesn't look, I mean, doesn't look too bad. I mean, I'm gonna go with the resistance test. I'm gonna go after the resistors. If your resistance test turned out good, if we had 60 ohms and we still had the symptom, then I was gonna go after the modules. So I was gonna be disconnecting one module at a time until this signal here, this voltage waveform changes. Okay, so I don't know if this is good or bad. Now let's go after the resistors and see where they're located so we can test them. So now I will locate the resistors so we can test them. Alright, so I'm gonna turn off the key. The interfaces that we saw on the wiring diagram, one of them is behind the engine cover, somewhere over here, the interface that contains the resistor. So one is behind the engine cover, and then the other one is behind the instrument cluster. The one behind the instrument cluster is easier to get to. So I'm gonna remove these screws. There's another one over here. We're gonna remove all the screws around the instrument cluster so we can get to it. This is the easiest. Let's start with the easy one. We're gonna remove the resistor and test it. If it tests out okay, then we have to remove the engine cover and find the resistor behind the engine and test that one too. So let's go, let's grab a screwdriver and remove the cluster. If the resistor was in one of the modules, we were gonna be disconnecting one module at a time until we find out which one has the resistor that's working. Okay, but the resistors on this system are just on harness. So let's get to that one resistor, test it, and go from there. So let's move this cluster so we can get access to the resistor behind it. Alright, so let's pull this up. I hope you can see back there. Let me turn on the light. So here is one interface of the J19 data system. So right here. And as you can see, we have the green wire and the yellow wire. So here's the interface, and this one is the resistor. This one should be the resistor right here. Okay? And I don't know if you can read, it says to instrument panel. Let me zoom you guys in. Okay, so this guy is the interface. Okay, so now what I need to do is I have to remove the resistor from the interface, and then we're gonna test it with the multimeter. So I just have to pull this resistor out. Here it is. So it's got two pins in there, one of these two pins. We should be able to test this resistor. This is a resistor, guys. We should be able to test this resistor with a multimeter. So now let's grab a multimeter and test this resistor. Alright, here is the resistor that we removed from the bus. We're gonna back probe. No, I guess this is front probing. We're gonna front probe these two holes right here. Okay, we're gonna front probe these two holes that are on the side of the locking tab. Okay, so I'm gonna use these two back probing tools, and these are connected to our multimeter. Actually, let's test our mirror first. Once I touch these two together, we should see numbers on the multimeter. So I'm going to touch these two together. As you can see, our mirror is working. Let me push this over here so we can also have the mirror on the picture here. So this is going to be a little tough to do while holding the camera. So I'm going to do it this way. So we're going to front probe these two. and this should be able to, so I'm front probing these two holes, and with these two back probing tools connected to the resistor, we should read a resistance of 120, if I can get this to work, a resistance of 120 on the multimeter. And as you can see, I got these two connected. What does the mirror show? The mirror is showing basically 0. Okay. Dang it, I can't get this thing to stay. So right there, we have our test leads connected to the resistor, and we're reading 0. So this resistor is open. Bingo! This is our problem, guys. I mean, I don't really get lucky that often. Usually it's the resistor that's hard to get to that opens sometimes, and the other one that's hard to get to is behind the engine cover. And that one is the one that usually goes bad because it's right there in the engine bay. With the heat generated by the engine, that one usually melts. Over time it melts. But I guess this one behind the cluster decided to quit on us. So I think I have another resistor like this around here. I'm gonna look in my toolbox and see if I have one of these resistors. I will show it to you. We're gonna take another measurement. Hopefully I have it. If I don't, I'm gonna order it. Once it gets here, we'll pick this video back up. Let me search around and see if I have this resistor, and then I'll bring you guys back up. Okay, luckily I had one of these resistors. As you can see, it says 120 ohms. I hope you can see that, 120 ohms. Okay, so this is a good resistor. So now let's test this one. We're gonna connect this one over here. Let me see if I can do this. Doing this one-handed is always not fun. So right here, I got these two connected to the side with the locking tab, and look at the mirror. We are reading 119 ohms. So this resistor here is good. Okay, so we have a good resistor. So the issue was this resistor. This resistor is open. Since this is showing 119 ohms, which is very close to 120, now let's go back inside the bus and connect this to this interface behind the instrument cluster. After installing this resistor, our total resistance of the whole network should drop down to 60 ohms, because now we will have two resistors in the system, two 120 ohm resistors in the system. So the total resistance of the system should drop down to 60 ohms. If it drops down to 60 ohms, we will know that we have fixed this vehicle. We got lucky, guys. This was the problem. The first one we went to is the one that had the problem. So let's go in the bus and connect this. All right, so we're gonna install this resistor here. Let's push this in. All right, so we got this good resistor installed on this interface. So now let's just push this. All right, so I'm not gonna bolt the instrument panel back yet. Now let's go to our data link connector and do our resistance test. All right, so our multimeter is still on the ohm scale. We're gonna connect this test lead to one of the multimeter test leads, and then this one is gonna go to the other one. Okay, so now if we found the problem, which was that open resistor, once I connect this, our total resistance of the network should drop down to 60 ohms. So now let's see what our multimeter is reading. As you can see, now we're reading 59.4 or 59.3. So this is fixed, guys. This is fixed. So right here you saw our resistance went down to basically 60 ohms now. So this is fixed, and I have the key off. You have to do this ohm measurement with the key off or with the battery disconnected. So now I'm going to connect my lab scope to these test leads. We're going to turn the key on to see if our voltage waveform is going to be different from what we just saw. And then we will start the bus to see if these gauges will stop sweeping as the engine is running. So I'm going to connect the lab scope and bring you guys back up. Alright, I got the lab scope connected to the test leads on the data link connector. So now I'm going to turn the key on so we can look at the voltage waveform of the network. So the key is on. I don't see a big difference between the pattern that we saw and this one. I mean, the waveform kind of looks the same to me. I don't know. I can't really tell. I don't know if you guys can tell the difference, but kind of looks the same to me. So the signals are definitely mirroring each other. They look the same. So, I mean, the only thing I could rely on was the resistance measurement, because right now the waveform, I mean, looks the same to me. So now let's start the bus to see if the gauges will stop sweeping. So there goes the initial sweep. Wonderful. I hope you guys can see that. Alright, so right there, as you guys can see, our gauges are no longer sweeping. I'm gonna give it gas a little bit so we can look at the tachometer. Do you see that? Nice. So our gauges are no longer sweeping back and forth. Look at this one. Nice. This is fixed, guys. So I'm gonna turn off the bus so we can wrap up this video. Alright guys, I'm gonna leave it over here. The bus is fixed. As you guys saw, the gauges on the dashboard are no longer sweeping back and forth. Now we can tell the engine speed. When I stepped on the gas pedal, the RPM gauge increased accordingly. So the issue was an open resistor in the CAN bus system. I don't have to connect the scan tool to the bus to erase the trouble code. As you guys saw, the gauges actually on the cluster were working now. So there's no need to erase the trouble code. Once I drive the bus around, the trouble code will erase itself. Okay? So I hope you like this video. If you do, give it a thumbs up. If you don't, give it a thumb down. But if you do, you gotta tell me why so we can make better videos in the future. Thanks for watching. If this is your first time here, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Ring the bell so you can get notified every time I upload a new video. Once again, thanks for watching. See you next time.